Hello and welcome to Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I'm going to be interviewing Eva Papp. Eva has written a book, Chasing the Wild Authentic, a field guide to the practices, boundaries, and North Star of living your truth. I'm super excited to have Eva on the show. And this is another full circle moment for me because I took her pilot group class and I really enjoyed it. And it was a time when I really needed it. So it was not only a gift from her, but from the universe as well that this landed in my lap. And it really has been helpful. So a little bit about Eva before we get started. Eva Papp, MALMHC, is a licensed psychotherapist, coach, and expert on multidisciplinary approaches to well-being. She practices psychology from an integrative perspective and has worked collaboratively with a wide range of medical and health practitioners. She carries the knowledge she gained from 25 years as a psychotherapist and her field research in Siberia and the Peruvian Amazon into her work with large group coaching and speaking and writing on active authenticity. Her innovative model of well-being found in the book I mentioned earlier, Chasing the Wild Authentic, a field guide to the practices, boundaries, and North Star of living your truth. Worth saying again because I'm really enjoying the book. Eva, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Liz. I'm so excited to be here. And I just have to say, this is my first moment after writing the book to step out to talk about it. So I'm really interested to see what it's like to go from being super siloed to now being in conversation. So I'm really looking forward to it today too.
I'm excited about our conversation. Like I said earlier, I'm really enjoying the book. I have to admit, usually I finish the book by the time the interview comes. I'm only halfway through, and I'm really looking forward to finishing it because I'm kind of a geek about the topic myself. And who can't use this information? So, anybody afterwards will give you all of the information about the book, when you can find it, where you can find it, and I'll definitely have the information down in the show notes too. But let's get started, Eva. So, what led you to writing this book?
Well, as you so nicely said in that really mouthful of an introduction, I've been a psychotherapist for 25 years. And, I love my work, and it's a very intimate and profound journey that I go on with people. And there have been many nights where I've left the office and it's been dark and cold, but inside I've just felt so alive and warm. And because of the intense and growthful exchanges and my learning that has come from being in that process with people, and I've had this desire to share some of the wealth of information that I've gathered over these 25 years as a psychotherapist, but also in my researches with a wider audience so that people don't have to go to therapy necessarily to learn some of the really core truths that are really essential to living a happy and balanced life of well-being. So that was my motive. And actually, I wrote the curriculum for the course that you took. And one of my students said to me, really, Eva, you should put this material in a book so people can read it instead of just come to your workshops. And that sent me on a 2-year journey, which is now culminating with the book coming out probably the beginning of November. So there you have
That's
it.
awesome. Yeah, kudos to the person who said write the book. It was a great thing to prompt. Yeah, and the book really is good. Can't say it enough, obviously. So let's jump. What is the book about?
So in a nutshell, it's about how to, everywhere people are saying, be authentic, make sales, be authentic, be authentic. It's the best way to be a happy person or be real or whatever. But nobody says how to do it. And it's funny to me because as a psychotherapist, to be authentic is probably one of the hardest things to be. So this was prompted. I'm driving down the main street of Vashon, and there was a little sign in a church. And I opened the book this way that says, be authentic. And I just sat back and laughed. And I'm like, do they even know what they're asking people to do? And like it started off kind of funny, but then it really wasn't. I was like, we really need real information about how to, instead of trying to live our lives based on what everybody's telling us what to do, how to go inward discover our truth and how to bring that out into the world so that we have confidence and clarity and ease and purpose and meaning, all the things that really do follow upon being authentic. We don't know how to do that. Like the information is there, but it's kind of been lost. So I said, you know what? I'm going to write this book, and it's going to be this twofold purpose. One, to help people really know how to turn back inward and live what's true for them. That's one. But two, to really pull together the core information that we all need to live well in a complex world so that everybody has access to this. So those were the two sort of motivating reasons why plus the little prompt from Jen, by the way, who said, put this in a book. So that got me started, and it's been the driving force. So the book is like in four pieces. One, how to know who you are, right? That's the basic thing. The second part is then once you know how to express that in the world, right? Then the third is once you know how to express it, guess what? Not everybody's going to like what you have to say. So how do you protect who you are? And then finally, how do you live the highest, most expansive version of who you are? So that's really how the book is sort of organized and what I'm hoping to convey to people.
Nice. To start, how about we define authenticity, because it's been a buzzword for several years now. What is being authentic? What is authenticity?
Okay, before I answer that, I want to share a main premise of the book, which is that nobody knows who they are. We live in a state of ambivalence. So the book starts off that way. It's like, let that go. You haven't made some error because you don't know who you are. It's where we all are. But now, how do you begin to live more of who you are? Because that's what generates all the benefits and the greater self-knowledge that helps you then create a world that really works for you, right? So when you think about it that way, authenticity means how to be in touch with your truth and how to express it in each moment. And it's not just the truth of who you are in that moment, but a more complex holding of who you are. So not just how I feel, but what are my obligations and commitments right now? What is it that I'm reaching toward in the future, and how to pull that all together and live that truth? That's being authentic. It's a 360 authenticity. It's not just like, let me say what's top of mind for me right now, which might actually not be true for who you are in the next hour, right?
Mhm.
Which is what people think about authenticity, is like being real. That's such a simplified and really not accurate understanding of authenticity. It's 360. And it changes, right? So the book is all about how to stay in up to speed with who you are in each moment too. So how to live in active authenticity. That's what the book is about.
I think that's really good
Did
to
that
talk.
answer your question?
Yeah, it really did. And I think it's really good to
Yeah.
like just start off with that fundamental piece of knowing who you are, because look at a mom. I look at myself, my listeners have heard me say this, I'm sure several times, but I came to a spot where I had put myself on the back burner for so long that I didn't even know who I was anymore. Didn't know what I liked, what brought me joy, what did I want to do, So let's talk about that foundational piece of getting to know who we are as an individual.
So again, I'm going to answer that, but I want to say that your situation, I'm a parent, my son just went off to college. So I'm in that, like all of a sudden I have all this time. What do I want to do now? Right. So I understand that. And so many times we think when we have a deep heart connection and commitment, that it then means either or. We either give everything to that or we then don't. And really, and the book talks about how to do this, it's how do you do both? And how do you do both with ease? So it's not about overkill, but how do you constantly reference what's true for you as you love your children up and give them everything you can, but you're always top of mind in every conversation you have, about every commitment you have. And this is one of the main points of the book. It is a yes to others, and this is actually one of the principles of yes. I think it's a second principle. A yes to others always, always must be at the same time a yes to yourself. So you never abandon yourself. to achieve something else, even if it's the greatest love of your life, like your children. That's actually not healthy to do it that way. It's like, how do you say yes and yes? And I think that's chapter 9 in the book. Anyway, so that's the first thing, not losing yourself. But now I want to go back to your fundamental question. How do we begin this journey? And I start off by talking about something that we kind of all are aware of, but we don't really emphasize enough, that everything that we experience comes along 3 channels. It's not just I have a feeling, I feel sad. There's a correlate of that in my body. There's a correlate of that in my mind. And so when we sort of expand the lens with which we perceive ourselves, and we start thinking about ourselves always as this 3-channel being, we start to have volumes of information come in about who we are in each moment. And the book talks about how to work with that to begin to start referencing yourself and all this information that actually is there at all times, so that we know how to nuance our actions so that our actions bring us closer to ourselves, closer to what we want, and bring the well-being that comes from doing those things.
Nice. Yeah, you begin the book with experiencing and those 3 channels of experiencing and recognizing our perception skills that may be weak. So let's dive in for those who don't understand. Like they're thinking, what are the 3 channels? Like explain what are the 3 channels and how can we, get in touch with those?
So the 3 channels, like I mentioned, are thinking, are feelings, emotional feelings, and then the sensual feelings. What is my physical energetic experience? So it's at all times thinking about ourselves through those 3 lenses. So that's the beginning. So it often happens that sometimes people are really good, like maybe they're afraid of being in their body. And this can happen a lot of times for women, but men as well, who've had experiences that have been not so comfortable in their bodies. And it has caused them to step away from thinking about their body, privileging their body, recognizing their body, and they start operating out of their head, right? Or out of their emotions. And things get channeled through the mind and the emotions that really belong in the body. So, for instance, I give an example of someone who, um, in the book, I give an example of someone who just really is like great with their mental processes. They're a really intelligent person. They're really quick with all kinds of mental, mathematical kind of genius stuff, but they're clueless about what they're feeling, like what's going on in their body. So they're often sick or they're often injured because they can't hear and then respond to the truth of the body because they have abandoned their body to live in the mind. And you probably know people like that. They're really sharp, whatever, but they don't live in the body. Or you have somebody who is all emotional. They're completely driven by this drama and that drama, but they don't really know what they're feeling. Like if you really drill down to what's behind all of that big emotion, they couldn't tell you. So this is the beginning of starting to just be aware, like, wow, I've got all these channels that are trying to feed me information at all times. How can I start paying attention? And the curious thing is, as we begin to attend to these different channels, we wake them up and we start to recognize them. We start to hear them. And the more we pay attention, the more we hear them, guess what? The more we hear them, it's this multiplying effect. And this is how even people who start off with some of their channels being weak can strengthen them to the place where they're feeding them with this robust amount of information, which they can then move forward and do the next part of the system, which is then, okay, I know what I'm feeling, but why am I feeling what I'm feeling, right? So you got to know the what. It's the beginning of everything, which is why I start the book there and how to begin to do that. And then it goes from there into like, why am I feeling? And now that I know what and why I'm feeling, what am I going to do about it? So it's just, it's like a system. It's kind of cool. I really like the book.
It is really cool. And I like how you break the 3 different feelings, and you give examples with the aunties. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I've related to auntie number 2 and auntie number 3. Like there was a long time where it's like, okay, what am I emotionally feeling right now? Like I actually had to bring home a chart from my therapist of what are the feelings and kind of target in, and you, that was something that you offer in your group too. Like this is a feelings list and I can reference this. How am I feeling right now? Talk about that a little bit on how people, if they're feeling like, well, gosh, I'm so out of touch with how I'm feeling that I just don't know. So how do I go about like getting in touch with, how am I really feeling?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And you are really honing in on some of the core things of health. So, for instance, when I was a therapist, I would have people who would come in to my office that want to do work, but they couldn't answer the fundamental question of what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what their physical sensations were. In other words, they didn't have the basic building blocks to actually do therapy. So before we started, even could do work, we had to go back and build that basic competence. It's very important, right? So what I would suggest is, like, just as you said that your therapist sent you home with a word list, and I even suggest this in the book, just download one off the internet, play around with it. What am I feeling right now? Can I pay attention? Can I nuance some of these things, right? The other thing is when you're having an emotion, sit back and say to yourself, wow, is it more like this? Is it more like that? Or so you could start with, just like right now, what am I feeling right now? What are you feeling, Liz, right now? I don't know. Let's pay attention to it for a minute. Like for me, I'm very excited. I'm excited to share this material. I can feel, okay, so let's do three body. I can feel in my heart a warmth in my chest because I have joy in sharing this material. And I feel like I'm going to start to cry because that often happens when I have an emotion. I feel moved. So I've got this teary sensation going on, and I had this very expansive feeling going on. So if I were going to do my thoughts, I that were accompanying those feelings and me just sharing those with you, I'd be like, "Oh God, I wonder if they're going to think I'm nuts sitting here starting to cry on, this podcast." I'm not full on crying, everybody who's not watching. I'm just feeling the teariness, and it's also okay to cry. Um, so I had that thought, and then I had this thought, like, how happy I feel right now in sharing this material. So just in that moment, and I wasn't in touch with my feelings at all. You asked the question, we started talking, I'm like, let's do it right now. And I noticed my physical sensation of the warmth. I noticed the emotions that I was having. I noticed the thoughts that were going along with them. And the whole point of the book, and for anybody, is just to realize that you move through the world with these three channels that could be fully open and bringing you phenomenal amounts of information about yourself. This is the beginning of authenticity, caring enough to pay attention, investing energy, a little bit of time to considering yourself as the center as you move through the world. It's not that you all of a sudden don't value or invest in or commit to other things. You do it from a place of presence or awareness of what you're bringing and what's going on for you as you move into those moments. That's three channel awareness. And as you begin to do it, like I said, you get better at it just because you begin to notice those emotions and you begin to become familiar with them. So then as you become familiar, they're no longer the edge. You could sit there and then you see the next one that's beyond that. That's how your knowledge of who you are begins to expand. And again, this is like that bottom stage that's so important um, to develop.
I like that. And it reminds me of when you're starting to meditate and they talk about getting
Mhm.
in that observer space, getting in, or how I like to say, the objective observer, and just sitting back and
Mhm.
kind of looking at, analyzing, okay, how am I feeling right now? And what's my body doing? And what am I thinking? And, what does that look like? Instead of, it's easy for us to do it on someone else. So here they are, they're presenting this way. Wow, they look really upset, or boy, they look sad, or, but turning it back on ourselves, and I think that's a harder thing to do, but a really important thing to do when we're trying to, I guess, just plainly like resource ourselves and to
Oh,
show
I like
up
that. That's a nice
as
way of saying it.
ourselves, like in every moment. And from a nice, we're not going to scoot that word nice out of there, from a grounded place of being, because some situations, as we all know, can trigger us, right? And
Yeah.
into those shadow places. And sometimes we end up reacting instead of responding and that sort of thing. And you talk about, looking at the shadow and everything. So being able to look at ourselves, in a way to figure out, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? I think that's really nice. And you do, I believe you talk in the book also about, getting in that space of the observer.
Yeah, when I talk about the best mindset to have, but I do want to note one thing that you said that I think is also very helpful. You're talking about meditation as a place where you can really open and have the luxury and the encouragement actually to mindfully be attuned to what your experience is. When you're first starting out to develop these three-channel perception, I think it's very important to give yourself, oneself, sort of secluded time, because this is a much easier thing to do when you're not bombarded with what's going on in life and having to respond to situations, but you really can be in a quiet place where really the only thing you have to do is pay attention to yourself, right? So giving yourself very intentionally that as you start off, and I talk about the book, also, if you really want to get good, do attach it to something that you do every single day. And I suggested like brushing your teeth, but nothing's really usually going on when you're brushing your teeth. What, 2, 3 minutes in the morning, it's a perfect time to say, what am I feeling in my emotions? What am I feeling in my body? What am I thinking about? And if you do that every day at these just preordained times, then you remember to do it. And it starts to become a habit. And in fact, I did this little convention in the book, which is a little bit weird, but I italicized the word feel throughout the book just to remind people to, when I say feel, to tune into all three channels, to do that same thing, repetition, repetition, repetition. That begins to expand your awareness and remind you that, oh, this is an opportunity where instead of just what's my emotion, what's my thought, maybe the thing that you would habitually think about in that moment, can I now expand it to include my physical sensation? Well, like, what is my body telling me in this moment, right? So it's really consistency, quiet, and when, if you're pretty practiced at it, then you can do it in the flow of your life. But that's ultimately the goal, is to walk through life with that, or be able to drop into it in, any second, like we just did, like, oh, what's happening right now? Like that.
Yeah, and it's nice to have that awareness in the moment about how we're feeling. It's been a real gift for me. And I like how you talk about naming, because I think sometimes, all the time, it's really important to name something that's going
Mhm.
on or something that you're feeling.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
believe you call it
I
true
think
naming in the book.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I talk about, so naming, which is the first skill that we learn, it's first practice of being actively authentic. It's really not just about naming that thing that you're feeling in the moment. It's naming all of what you're feeling in the moment, because sometimes we're not just feeling one thing, we're feeling multiple things, and even sometimes they're paradoxical, like I hate you, I love you, all in the same like moment, right? So it's getting some more sophisticated, like, really, what are all the things? So true naming is not just the three channels, but it's what all the things in each channel, and being, particularly aware of paradoxical or competing thoughts or feelings. It's also being aware of the range of what you're feeling. So it's the not only like, how hot is this emotion, or how cold is it? In other words, in this situation, would it serve me to dial things down or even to dial things up. So it's sort of degree of what you're feeling. That's also part of true naming. And then I talk about specificity. Can you talk about what you're feeling with nuance? Because in living an actively authentic life, that nuance has huge information that later, when you learn to take authentic action, is really helpful. For instance, I might be tired. That's what I feel. Like that might be my general word for it. But when I really drill down, maybe my tiredness is about feeling demoralized.
Mm,
Wow, that extra bit of information really is useful then when it comes time to take authentic action, because you're not just responding to being tired, but to being demoralized, and the actions it suggests are quite a bit different than if you're just tired. So this, true naming is a very full experience of one's perception of self and what's going on in each moment. And that's where we start, and everything builds on that.
mhm. Yeah, I really
So
like the
yeah, that's
example
true.
that you gave in the book around that nuance. The person comes home and there's something on the floor, and you start the practice right there. Can you give an example like you do in the book about um having that nuanced look at our feelings and kind of tracing it back to what also might be going on
Mhm,
top
mhm.
of what you're experiencing in the moment?
Mhm, mhm. I think the thing that you are now talking about is a second practice of authentic action, which is true sourcing.
Mm,
So true naming is like what? Like what's going on? Like, and then true sourcing is why. Like what is happening? And what's happening right now, like in the book, it was they tripped over the backpack and they're all upset because they tripped over the backpack. But they also had this thought, and they only knew it because they were listening to their three channels, that my kids don't appreciate me and all the things that I do. I've raised unappreciative kids, right? That they were able to pick that piece up because they were paying attention to what their mind was telling them as they're like hurtling across the floor from tripping over a backpack. And then when they were doing this piece about, well, what is that feeling and that thought, and why am I feeling it? Is it really because I tripped, or is it because something happened that I didn't get this bonus at work? And when the person really thinks about not what's happening in the moment, but what has recently happened, I didn't get a bonus at work. And ever since that time, I've been feeling really like everybody unappreciates me. So, of course, you trip, and the first thing you think is, another example. They don't appreciate me. My kids don't appreciate me. And if you didn't follow through on this true sourcing, which is the next part of authentic action, you could march into the room, and so many of us have done this, right? And yelling at the kids, like, why did you put your, backpack? Why did you throw it? You guys are so unappreciative, right? And gone down that whole path. But the truth of the matter, because the person did some true sourcing, they realized that they had that thought because they didn't get the bonus at work, and it wasn't really about the kids. So when they realized that, that part of their upset went away. And by the time they actually reached their kids who were watching a Spider-Man movie, they their action was different. They didn't need to go on and on about picking up their stuff because they felt so unappreciated. They realized, like, no, these kids love me. I got to talk to them about hanging up their stuff, but it's not this thing that has gotten me so upset. Right. So let me enjoy this moment with them, number one, and not yell at them, and enjoy, because what I'm feeling is needing to be appreciated. And then let me go to work and address the true source of feeling unappreciated, which is I need to talk to my boss about that bonus. So now it's kind of complicated here because we're talking it, but as you work through the book, you can see how the one leads to the next to bring clarity to your experience so that the choices and the actions you then take are authentic and aligned with what's really going on, not necessarily what you feel is going on. And so true sourcing begins to say, okay, you know what's happening. How do you begin to differentiate between what's really going on and what you're just feeling? That starts in that piece of it. And that's, chapter 2 and 3 is a whole piece. What's going on now? What happened in the past that could be influencing how you're feeling and what you're thinking about what you're
I think
feeling.
that's a great example too, because so often, these little things, when something's bothering us or we're tired, we're home from work, the kids, whatever it may be, fantastic example of how we can see something or experience something and all of a sudden it's, up here instead of just being what it is, right? So I think it's very relatable to so many people, and that's sourcing, okay, taking that pause. Okay, I'm feeling this. My mind automatically went to X, Y, or Z. Why did my mind go to X, Y, and Z? I think is, finding that curiosity of like, oh my gosh, that really affected me. Why did that affect me so much? Right? What could it
Yes.
be other than just this toy on the floor or whatever it might be, or my partner left the dishes in the sink or whatever it is, that, is really bothering me. I think that that's really important and really relatable. So talk about that a little bit more, Eva, about that, like sourcing and kind of sleuthing out what else might be going on, because I think that's it. It's really important to talk about, because so
Yeah.
easily in everyday life, without the awareness of all of this stuff, we do automatically go to whatever it is, and we function out of whatever that is. I know back in the past when my kids were young.
And we think we're being authentic.
Yeah.
And we think we're being authentic because we're just letting rip what we feel.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely the wrong thing,
Yeah.
right? So I think you're right. And I think this is a very complex piece of our psychologies, right? And so, in fact, in writing the book, it was a little scary to put it sort of towards the beginning, because I dive into this in chapter 2 and 3 before I've had a chance to earn the reader's trust. By the end of the book, we're flying along, we're in sync. And, you can feel it by the end, right? But in the beginning, when my relationship with the reader is so new and vulnerable, to bring them into this deep material was so scary. I'm like, oh God, but I needed to do it for the system, and for to progress, you need to understand it. So, I just held my breath and prayed it would work and jumped in. But I want to talk about why true sourcing and why this was so important. And this really came from my years of clinical practice. People would come in and they would have an issue. And I found that if we held the issue lightly for a minute and explored the underpinnings of where they were coming from, we could suss out the true source of why they were experiencing what they were at this level, which was, everyday life. And having done that little bit of work and focused on the true root, and then brought attention to the true root, we saved immense amount of time. It wasn't like whack-a-mole trying all the things. Somebody comes in depressed. Well, you do this for depression. No, you first find out why. You go deep into finding why. And once you get the root, it's elegant. You put your focus and energy on the root and it resolves. And, 25 years, again and again and again, seeing the value of this true sourcing and taking a minute to say, why am I feeling? Why? And it's personal. It's not across the board. People are not depressed for all the same reasons. There's so much that goes into a, you know, uh, an everyday lived experience. If there's history, not only what's happening in the moment, what just happened recently, which is what I talked about, but in the past. And there are things that you know about, and there are things that you don't know about. And all of those could be impacting and amplifying your experience in the moment, so that you're reacting in a way that doesn't make that much sense sometimes, given what really the facts of the moment are.
Mhm.
And I call that in one part of the book, acting in out of sync way, either out of sync with the situation or out of sync with yourself, because sometimes we act in ways that are not consistent with who we are, right? So anyway, so this is really important work, and it's too much to get into, I think, in a podcast. But just to say, that our history is to be honored. It's to be understood as much as we can. And it's so helpful to be curious about it because there are things that we don't know and they will emerge in time. And the book gives ways about how to account for those things, even while we don't know what they are. So they don't get in our way, they don't cause inauthentic action, and they don't keep us from moving forward. Because that's what the whole book is about. How do you keep moving forward to what you want in life and to express this glorious version of who we each are?
Mhm.
Um, so you have to read the book to get into the nuances of it because it's a little bit more complicated, I think, for here, unless there's a real specific question you want to ask about it. But the book really talks about it and gives these, really good examples, I think, of what it looks like when when we're being dominated by some kind of event from the past that we don't know about, even ones that we know about but haven't yet resolved.
And what is it, like 80 or 90% of our functioning is in our subconscious, and that's where all of these past experiences lie. Like we're not reacting from our conscious mind, we're actually reacting from our unconscious, subconscious mind
Yeah,
space.
I don't know what I don't know what the percentages are here, but you're right. I mean, there's because who can remember everything? I can't even remember something I did yesterday.
I
You know what I
know,
mean?
right?
And so there's all this stuff in the past, right? But the thing about the book, and another reason I wrote it, is that not everybody really has access to therapy and or good therapy for a host of reasons.
Mhm.
And I wanted to give people a tool that they could use, a system that could actually help them move forward to happiness and well being, external well being and internal well being, without the need to rely on therapy, without the need to uh, do that deeper work. Now, caveat, sometimes the past is so painful that it's not possible. It's very difficult to move forward without doing that deeper work. And of course, I did it for 20 years and 25 years, and I have deep respect for that journey. Um, but there's so many people who can move forward and do that work as it makes sense for them to do it. They can move forward, but they don't have the knowledge or the tools to move forward. Because even as you move forward in your life and give yourself new experience, that in itself is healing.
Mhm.
So you can learn ways to move forward, to experience new things, and begin to change your perception of who you are, which mitigates against the old story of who you were in the past or who they told you were going to be, or these experiences, suggested what your limitations were. No, you could get rid of all of that because you're living some other truth now.
Mhm.
And that begins to change the neural networks in the brain over time, right? So it's a very complicated thing, as human beings are, as psychology is, but there is a way to move forward gently in a way that works for you, that provokes and promotes healing, that doesn't depend on having the resources or access to some of this deeper work. Though, if you can do the deeper work, that is, I think, the most efficient way to go, but not everybody can.
Mhm. And I'm glad that you pointed out too that through new experiencing, we can create new neural pathways, because I've experienced that um, in a couple different areas of my life where, I've had one person in my past saying this, that, or the other, and then I have new people in my life and new experiencing and create new neural pathways based on, what um, information I'm receiving from those new people as opposed to what the experiencing was, with the past people. I'm trying to be really delicate about the situation. And then also, like, as we're forming new friendships or more love partnerships, what you experienced before, you're like when you come out of relationship, your mind might be expecting X, Y, or Z to happen. Then when
Yeah.
it doesn't, it's like, oh, X, Y, and Z didn't happen, you know, and you're able to function from a new space of being, which I think is really important to point out, and also can be a tool to kind of figuring out who you are, you know, how you were functioning, what your mind was expecting in the moment, and
Yeah.
another way to kind of like be an investigator, I guess, into like, who am I, you know, and
Yes.
what really makes me tick.
Well, that's why I call it a field guide, because it is about stepping into the unknown. It is about going on an exploration. You just happen to be, we each happen to be the subject of the exploration.
Mhm.
But it's like, okay, we're going on this journey. Again, I feel very emotional about that because it's so important that we're going on this journey that centers who we are, that honors who we are, and that um, in pursuing who we are is an avenue to unleash the riches of who we are, both our ease, our purpose, our joy, our confidence, different relationships. And then when you start having that internal well-being, like, what are the things that light me up? What do I want to do in the world? And then when you work from your pleasure and ease, you can't help but be successful,
Yeah.
right? It's like, and it just, everything builds on itself, but you kind of have to get on, I call it a forward moving spiral. You have to kind of jump on this thing that is going to take you forward as you engage with yourself and as you listen and you learn, get the feedback from what you just did, and it just moves you forward.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And we each have it. We each can access it. It doesn't matter where you're starting. Your starting point does not matter. You start exactly where you are. You do these principles and you start moving forward. And as you move forward, you start to experience these different things. As you do, it starts changing your brain. You start having different understanding of who you are. Then you can live from that more authentic place, which just brings even more knowledge of who you really are. I mean, it's this incredible forward moving spiral. And this is why I say in the forward to the book that the book is really written from the perspective of the embodied generative feminine. And this is what I mean, that it recognizes the spirals and circles and seasons of life, and it respects the physical and the sensual as equal paths of knowledge. It's not just, let me go to college and university and study this and study that. Okay, that's one kind of information, but there's tremendous wisdom that each of us can access. And the book is really a guide on how to do that.
I like too that you mentioned pleasure and
Mhm.
finding pleasure in life, because it is a toolkit for finding your joy, finding what makes you happy, and living in a state of pleasure.
Um, yeah, and I think that that is one of the lost markers. And again, I feel emotional about that, is one of the lost markers, that pleasure has been so de-emphasized. And okay, I'm just going to go on a limb here. I think a little bit because pleasure may be associated with femininity.
Mhm.
Like, how many men are running around trying to pursue their pleasure? Like, it is oftentimes cast in, you know, sort of these harder things like sensual, or not sexual achievement, or um, success or status. I mean, they're harder things. Pleasure is often seen in the domain of women. And I don't mean to be all gendered and weird. So just take off whatever labels don't work. I'm just saying that there's this receptive, and men can be in the feminine too. So this is not a girl boy thing. Okay.
No.
But it has been, the pleasure is part of, I think, the feminine, the generative feminine, which has been ignored. But it is a marker for wisdom,
Mhm.
because I actually think it's a through line to who we are, because our pleasure is unique as we are unique. And following your pleasure, I think, is one of the ways that we can touch or tap into who we are authentically. And as we begin to respect our pleasure and to live from our pleasure, our life becomes more pleasurable. And that mitigates against all the messaging that you need to strive and achieve, because guess what? That is at odds with pleasure. Pleasure is in the moment and it's complete. It's not like, okay, I do X, Y, and Z, and then no, you're in it now. It's a satisfaction, right? So it mitigates against all these stories that are currently out there about how to have a happy life, right? You can have that right now by just tapping into your pleasure. It's a fulfilled, complete moment. And so I think it's very threatening to sort of the dominant paradigm right now. So I whispering because in a way, the book is revolutionary. I don't talk about it in that way, but because of the principles on which it's founded and grounded, it is in opposition to the dominant paradigm and messaging that we all are laboring under right now. Oh, it
Yeah.
was so fun that I started to whisper. It felt like really like covert.
We're doing super spy stuff now, like breaking down societal rules. And it is
Yeah,
the
right, right.
narrative, right? Because
What's that?
it is the narrative. Go to work, 9 to 5, seek your pleasure on the weekends, the daily grind, succeed, push forward. It is very, and like, no, like I want to live in a space where I am feeling pleasure from the work that I do. I'm feeling
Thank
pleasure
you.
from my interactions with my coworkers or my friends or something like that, because that is my guide to living that happy, fulfilled life in a state of flow. Because if I'm able to access my pleasure inside my body and what actually brings me pleasure on a daily basis, then it's only going to lead to more pleasure. Because I was like, oh, I love doing this podcast. I feel really fulfilled afterwards. We had this great conversation. Eva was great, pleasure. I want to do this again. Right. Or, we're watching our kids and we get pleasure from seeing them, smile or hit the ball when they were playing sports or whatever they did when they were younger. Right. It's like we want to experience more of that.
Well, see, and here, well, two things. One is it's a complete moment. It doesn't leave you hungering for more. So
Yeah.
it's not a vehicle. It's not a marketing vehicle. It's not going to get you to buy more because you're satisfied. And that's dangerous to a system that is built on constantly buying more. Now, there's nothing wrong with the system. You got to buy, you got to do whatever. But
Mhm.
I'm telling you, it's when you are now in a model where there's contentment, it doesn't satisfy the need of the marketing or commodity driven environment. And I'm getting out there a little bit, but
No, it's true though.
it really is a different path. And you mentioned, pleasure in my body. I remember 3-channel experience. There is such a thing as mental pleasure. Like sometimes when I read something like a poetry, oh my God, it is the most pleasurable thing, right? Or seeing an elegant solution to something. It's like mind blowing, right? Sometimes when I read and I never even understand all the pixelated this and the AI that and I mean, it's really profound on some level, right? That could be this mental pleasure. There's also like emotional pleasure, what makes you feel emotionally good. And like you mentioned looking at your kids smile, like it's one of the greatest joys, right? So
Yeah.
always be thinking 3-channel, not for pleasure as well. It's not just physical sensual pleasure, it's mental pleasure, it's emotional pleasure. And am I availing myself of the pleasure that's here for me right now?
Yeah.
Pleasure. It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, then we don't need
Awesome
to go out
marker.
and buy that, new sweater to make us feel good or the bigger car or the boat or whatever. I swear, the more I find my joy and happiness, the less I need, the less I have.
Mhm.
Very minimalistic now. It takes very little, and I only spend money on things I know are going to bring me joy, you know.
Yeah. And that's not to say that that sweater that brings you joy, that's real and that has
That's real. You
value.
can
Don't you
find a
know?
sweater that's super soft and can bring you joy. Okay, there is that. The favorite
You
sweater, but still.
absolutely. So it's again, it's not, no way of doing it is wrong. I think that once you really experience your pleasure, it naturally goes to, it's just not like, oh, I shouldn't do this or I should, it's, you don't need it because you're satisfied.
Yeah.
And that is the scariest thing to the existing paradigm, is to have people who are satisfied. The striving goes away, the constant buying goes away, the constant striving and having to get to the next thing, which drives so much of what's happening, goes away. Scary. But not to us who are actually the ones enjoying ourselves,
Mhm.
right? So that's why I think the information is not out there, because it is a threat. And so it's been suppressed. And so that is the revolutionary piece of the book. And this is, it's still in production. It should be out in November, but it's the revolutionary that I don't talk about because it's not the primary focus of the book. But I do believe that as we become understanding who we are, how to bring ourselves joy and pleasure and satisfaction, it will naturally change what's happening in the world, which I think needs a little bit of a facelift, a little, maybe that's not a good word, but needs a little change up.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit. And thank you so
Just
much
a
for
little bit.
sharing this, because it really is a pathway to happiness and joy. I can't say this enough. This has been
Yeah.
my journey. I've had friends on this journey. It's their
Yeah.
journey too. And it is awakening to a new way of being. And it's like this process is available to you to walk yourself through these different things and to come out on the other side, just being able to experience life in a different way that is more joyful and happy. And not all the time, we go through our difficult stuff, right? But being able to have this process and be able to look at it, and even in the moments where it's like, okay, I feel this way, but I know it, this other thing is overlaying it that happened from my childhood, and this is why I'm feeling this way right now. The ability to walk myself, to walk ourselves through something to get to the other side, to have that peace, joy, and satisfaction.
Let me just say this thing that I think is really critical about what you said, Liz.
Please.
That when you can differentiate and this is about the past, you take a different action. And that is what is the path of freedom. Because that's why true sourcing is so important. Because when you can locate why it is you're experiencing what you are, then when you go to cobble your action, you can give it its proper place, one of love and respect, but not one you're going to act on, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can build your information system into your action, but when you don't prioritize it, you deprioritize and you prioritize where you want to go, all of a sudden the actions you take on a daily basis start moving you toward where you want to go. And that's the importance of understanding. It's not just to have willy-nilly information. It's so that you can take actions that will move you away from the stories of the past and into a new story that you're creating in the moment based on who you are and what you really want, right?
Yeah.
And that is the beauty of true sourcing. It's like helps you take actions and chart a direction that's in keeping with your authentic self.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so true. And you can take this into relationships of all kinds as well. And if
Yeah,
someone's willing to show up in that space with you, can take communications, not only with yourself, but with others to a whole new level.
absolutely. Absolutely. It's paradigm shifting for everybody involved.
Yes, agree. Eva, as we wrap up this hour, I can't believe we're already coming upon an hour in a few minutes. Is there anything that you would like to share that you didn't get to share about your experience or the wild authentic?
Um, I think the thing, and I shared it, but I want to emphasize it, which is it doesn't matter where you are, that where you are is perfect, not because it might be pain-free, but because it's where you are. And that is the most real thing there is. The point is, how do I get from where I am to where I want to be in a way that works with who I am, right? And with the changing self that I am, because the thing is, as you move to the new, you're going to have a whole new context. How do you then move to the next new and the next new? And that's what this book is about. It's about, because, again, like I said in the beginning, everybody's be authentic. What does it mean? And how do we do it? How do we do it? Nobody, hasn't been talked about. And the book really, with from a place of love and respect for where people are. And, you can choose after reading the book to stay exactly where you are. That's fine. There's no obligation. We live in a world where, like, you go on the internet and there's 1,000 people telling you, do this, do that. It's like exhausting, right? And all you do is then feel bad about where you are. It's like, no, where you are and where you choose to be is fine. But if you want something different and you want a psychologically grounded path that's actually integrated, this can help you get there. And I like to say it's like open source, meaning it's not really based on any model, any spiritual tradition, any therapeutic. There's a million therapeutic models. It's none of that. It is a base that you could put who you are on top of and then move forward on. So yeah, I hope that your readers or your listeners really make use of it, because I wrote it for you all.
Yes, check it out. Eva, I also ask all of my guests, what is a jewel of wisdom that you would like to leave our audience with today?
Oh, geez, I wish you had prepared me. A jewel of wisdom. Oh, okay, I've got one here. You are a gift, and you are brought here as a gift. And you can believe that. You can trust yourself, and you have what you need to take the next step, which will get you to where you want to go. So you have everything that you need. That's it.
I love that. Thank you so much for that.
Totally.
And Eva, how can people find your book? How can they find you?
Okay, so the book should be out in the beginning of November. It'll be on Amazon. At some point, it will be in bookstores. It should be on Vashon too, the Vashon bookstore in December. I also wanted to say, for people who are in transition, a lot of times people start the new year and they're like, oh, I got to make changes. It's a great gift actually for people who are, moving into some kind of a transition in their life, kids going to school, having been divorced, whatever. So it's just something to take and read. And if you find it's useful, hand it, give your copy to somebody. The idea in which I read it is that it would help people. So, feel free to do that, obviously. My website is wildauthentic.com. And also where I'm more active is on my Substack channel, which is Wild Authentic X for explore. So it's wildauthenticx.substack.com. So you guys can find me there on a more regular basis. I will actually let Liz know when the book is available so she can tell you guys. So tune into her channel for that. And that's it.
Perfect.
And thank
I'll
you,
make
Liz. This has been great. It's been a great conversation. It's been really fun to share sort of what I'm doing and the book with you and your audience. I keep saying readers because that's where my brain is at right now, but with your audience.
Thank you, Eva. It's been such a pleasure to have you and such a full circle moment for me. I'm so glad that you were able to come on and discuss the book. I was really excited to have you on, and I really think it's going to make a huge difference, not only to the readers that read it, but how it ripples out into the world. So thank you so much for putting
Totally.
that workshop and that work into a book. And I think it's gonna change lives, and I think it's good. And thank you so much for putting that book out there. And thank you so much for joining me. I really
Thank you,
appreciate you.
Liz. Yeah, thank you. And to
I'll
all of you guys out there,
Yes. And I'll make sure that I have the book and all the information and how to reach you, Eva, down
Okay.
in the show notes. So everybody be looking for that. And thank you
Okay.
everyone for joining me as well. This is Liz Peterson and this is Raise the Vibe with Liz. And you can find me at Raise the Vibe with Liz on my website and all social media. Thank you, everybody. And remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks, Eva.